Losing the Plot is a series all about examining video game narratives. As you'd expect, it's full of spoilers, so beware if you've not played either of the games in the Last of Us franchise, and also Shadow of the Colossus. If you're cool with spoilers for those, then let's get started. A few months ago, I made a video about The Last of Us, tying in with the release of the sequel. It talked about how community is baked into the heart of the game despite its grim backdrop, and explored the relationship between its two leads. While making the video, the sequel was already attracting negative attention thanks to leaks on the internet that revealed some controversial plot points. As the reviews rolled in, there were some seriously mixed opinions. This was a game that was dividing people in ways the first game never did. So I made a decision. I would do something with this series that I never normally do. Normally, I pick the subject of a Losing the Plot episode based on games I've already played, picking games that resonated with me in some way, or I have strong opinions about the narrative. With The Last of Us 2, I made the decision to make a video on it even before I'd played it, even referencing this in the outro of the previous game's video. With a game this divisive, something about its story had to be picked apart. I knew, going into the game, that I needed a hot take. And that hot take is this. If you want to understand the message of The Last of Us 2, you need to play Shadow of the Colossus. No, really, hear me out here. While playing a certain section of The Last of Us 2, I was smacked with the revelation that the game was following the exact structure of Team Ico's beloved PS2 classic. I'm gonna describe it before showing the parallels, so see if you can spot them as I go. When Ellie, the deuteragonist of the first game and protagonist of the second, arrives at a theatre with her girlfriend Dina at the end of their first day in Seattle, Dina appears to be ill and reveals that she's pregnant. This means she can no longer accompany Ellie, and instead stays in the theatre, acting as Ellie's mission control by listening in on communications from the bad guys. Ellie spends the next 2 days venturing out from the central location and follows clues to reach a new target. The first target is a lone male who Ellie and Dina believe to be Joel's brother Tommy, so Ellie heads there to team up with him. The second target is a woman named Nora who's hiding in a hospital. The third target is Abby, the key villain in Ellie's story, who is hiding out in an aquarium. After each target, Ellie returns to the theatre base and is changed each time. After returning from meeting their friend Jesse, the actual lone male she was seeking, Ellie has some minor injuries that she initially tries to stitch up herself. After the hospital, Ellie is a wreck, with shaking hands and a ton of scrapes and bruises all over her torso. At the aquarium, Ellie breaks down and almost vomits as a result of her actions, and appears irreparably broken over what she's done. What happens next is the invasion of the central location by an antagonist, which results in a final confrontation that ends in Ellie in a worse place than when she started. If you've played Shadow of the Colossus, these scene selections put together in this way may seem familiar to you. If you haven't, let me explain. Shadow of the Colossus was a game released in 2005 for the PS2, remastered for the PS3 in 2011, and remade entirely for the PS4 in 2018. On the surface, it's a game about a young hero setting out to take down a bunch of dangerous creatures for a noble goal. But as the game progresses, that heroic designation gets flimsier and flimsier. The action of Shadow of the Colossus takes place in a vast open world with a temple at its center. The protagonist, Wanda, arrives here with his girlfriend Mono, who has passed away. He places her on the altar and urges for something to bring her back. A mysterious voice that is neither male nor female tells Wanda that he can bring her back if he slays the 16 colossi that plague the Forbidden Lands. And so Wanda sets out to do just that, prompting several hours of epic battles, climbing up vast creatures and slaying them, returning to the temple between each target. As the game progresses, it becomes increasingly obvious that what Wanda is doing is not a noble act. The colossi are not hostile until Wanda provokes them. When they die, there isn't a sense of victory and celebration, but instead one of mourning and tragedy. And each colossus Wanda kills bleeds out a mysterious black substance that infects him, degrading him over the course of the adventure. After the 16th colossus has been slain, Wanda returns to the temple, where a group of local warriors have found him, and a confrontation ensues in which Wanda turns into a shadowy giant creature. He is ultimately defeated by the warriors, but Mono has been successfully revived. The game's structure, where the protagonist heads out to various targets from a central location while an incapacitated girlfriend lies in wait, is seen in The Last of Us 2. Ellie sets out to take down members of the Washington Liberation Front while Wanda seeks out Colossi. The takedowns of each target are not presented triumphantly, and the protagonist returns to the central location noticeably changed and degraded from the experience. In both games, the final confrontation happens in the central location, but in both cases, the protagonist is now filling the villain role. In Shadow of the Colossus, this is a transformed Wanda being taken down by warriors in self-defense, while in The Last of Us 2, the confrontation comes later, and you fight off Ellie as Abby, the character set up as the antagonist at the start of the game. At the end of this confrontation, the protagonist is in a worse place than they were before, with Wanda reincarnated as a cursed child, and Ellie lying bloody and beaten on the floor of the theatre and forced to return home in shame. And in both cases, the incapacitated girlfriend leaves with a baby. Mono takes the reincarnated Wanda away, while Dina is later revealed to have had a successful birth as we see her baby in a time skip. It goes even further than that though. Both protagonists arrive in their locations with a horse that gets taken out of the picture at some point, although Ellie loses hers much sooner than Wanda loses his. Both are motivated by the death of a loved one, although in Ellie's case it's a separate person, Joel, the protagonist of the first game, and the game does everything in its power to make you feel bad about killing the targets that the game itself has told you to kill, although while Shadow of the Colossus pushed the player to make the killing blows themselves, The Last of Us 2 quite often takes control out of the player's hands for these moments. Another key difference is that Ellie's kills start even before reaching the central location. Why is it so important to note these similarities to a completely separate PlayStation exclusive? It's simple, to the point where Neil Druckmann and the rest of Naughty Dog's creative team had to have known what they were doing. The parallels are all right there. The central message of both games is to break the typical video game narrative and to reveal that the person you're playing as is not a good person and their quest is not a noble one. You are, in a way, playing as the villain. And the message that the harshness of a post-apocalyptic world has made people worse and robbed them of their humanity is woven throughout the narrative of The Last of Us 2.
Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up. Please stop. Please don't do it. Joel, please get up. No!
The effects of the world's harshness can be felt in the central driving force in the story for Ellie. After she gained a father figure in Joel in the first game, the sequel immediately strips him away from her. He's brutally tortured and killed in the early hours of the game, driving Ellie to revenge. What's interesting about this death is how abrupt it is. Usually, if a major character gets killed off like this, there's build-up, and the death itself gets dragged out so the character gets a significant send-off. Usually, so another main character can grieve. The Last of Us 2 doesn't do this. Joel's death comes about suddenly when a group that he and Tommy have chosen to trust reveal that they are out to kill him, and then they do. We don't see any of the torture, we just see the sudden shotgun blast to the leg, jump back to Ellie, who arrives just in time to see Joel get a golf club to the face. It's swift, it's brutal, and it's not remotely elegant. It's shocking and uncomfortable, and happens to a character that we connected with in the first game. Understandably, there are those that hated this death, and feel that Naughty Dog screwed over fans with bad writing. They did not. Zombie apocalypse media is notorious for killing off anyone at any time for any reason, and that's exactly what Naughty Dog did with Joel. Perhaps he trusted the strangers too much. But when being chased by a horde of zombies, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is whether or not the person who's helping you has motives to murder you. Yes, the scene was upsetting, and if it upset you, then it did its job. The exact opposite of bad writing. And by placing Ellie into the scene on the killing blow, it gave her a motivation, all wrapped up in the trauma of the incident. Over the next day, we witness Ellie's grief. We see her at Joel's grave. We see her looking at the watch he received from his daughter Sarah, his own marker of grief, and the way she smells his coat is a huge indicator of her sadness, a relatable moment for anyone who's ever lost a loved one. Ellie's rush to get justice is indicative of not only her state of mind, but also the world she lives in, further highlighting the harshness of Joel's death. There's no police force to come and arrest the perpetrators. Vigilante justice is all that exists in this world. Which is why she's so eager to get out there and kill Joel's murderers, and why she spends so much of the game being miserable and angry, a far cry from the Joker of the first game, or indeed certain flashback sections of the sequel. About the only thing pre- and post-trauma Ellie share is her brashness, which is pointed out in a flashback that in retrospect says a lot about why Ellie chooses the journey she does.
You know, you really need to stop letting people rile you up.
It's hard when they're dicks.
Her trauma lasts into the endgame where she suffers sudden flashbacks to the death and finds herself screaming helplessly in a barn. The incident has given her PTSD, and this is a world where stopping to reflect on that experience is a luxury that most cannot afford. Ellie's trauma is a central part of this story, one that drives all her actions, makes her sympathetic, but equally it can make her unsympathetic, as her lust for vengeance causes her to commit horrible acts. More on that later. But she's not the only character to suffer trauma. Abby killed Joel for a reason, her own revenge mission. And the game's main twist is that she isn't just a violent villain, we get to see her side of the story too. We learn that Joel killed her father, and that she's been suffering in the intervening 4 years. In flashbacks we see how her trauma has affected her relationships, led to her having restless sleep, made her singularly obsessed with vengeance, and caused her to see visions of her father's death, even after she supposedly fixed the situation. Because, you see, the game wants you to understand that Ellie and Abby aren't that different after all. When the game builds to a climax on Ellie's third day in Seattle, instead of jumping straight to the confrontation we expect, the game jumps back in time to the start of the first day and puts us in Abby's shoes. And while plenty of people have been upset by this decision, there's a logical reason for this. Namely, there are parallels between Abby and Ellie in many ways. They've both been on the same journey, but they're currently at different points on that journey. Ellie is out for revenge, while Abby has already had hers, and many of the consequences of Abby's revenge are directly tied to Ellie, particularly as Ellie is murdering her friends. But the parallels are everywhere. It starts in how they're presented. Neither Ellie nor Abby is presented as traditionally feminine, with Ellie being a tomboy lesbian, while Abby is jacked in a non-feminine way. Both are displaced from their original groups and now part of another organised community that's working surprisingly well in this world. Ellie used to live in a quarantine zone, which both games imply have all fallen, and now lives in Jackson, a close-knit community that resembles early American settlements. Abby used to be part of the Fireflies, holed up with her father at a hospital in Salt Lake City, yes, that one, and is now a member of the WLF, a military-style organisation housing thousands of people in various spots around Seattle. They've also both lost father figures, and those losses are tied to the other. Abby obviously kills Joel, but this is because her own father was murdered because of Ellie. Specifically, that doctor you have to kill at the end of the previous game in order to pull Ellie out of the hospital is Abby's father. But it was also surprising how much of their stories reflected each other in even more ways. Despite clear differences in sexuality, their love lives are similar. Both of them are in love triangles, with Ellie now dating her friend Jesse's ex, Dina, while Abby remains friends with her ex, Owen, who is dating their friend Mel. But that doesn't stop the sexual tension. The other woman in the love triangle is pregnant, with Dina admitting she's early into pregnancy during the 3 days in Seattle, while Mel is visibly pregnant during the same time frame. Both protagonists get sex scenes that get discovered by the third person in the triangle, as Ellie and Dina sleep together in a hidden weed den and Jesse walks in on them, and Abby and Owen have angry sex on Owen's boat, and Mel turns up in the morning and seemingly has figured out what's happened. Both women get flashbacks in tourist attractions, with Ellie visiting a museum with Joel in the best part of the game, and Abby discovering an aquarium with Owen when they snuck off together a couple of years before. This aquarium becomes important later, so much so that both Ellie and Abby vomit at some point in the same room at different points of day 3. Indeed, Ellie's reason for vomiting is because she kills Mel, who she then realises is pregnant, just like her own girlfriend. This is also why Abby almost kills Dina outright later on when she finds that she's pregnant, further enhancing the parallel. When you realise just how similar they are, it's definitely interesting to go back and see Ellie say this.
These people are not like us.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, Ellie. It makes me wonder if there's an alternate universe where the two of them could get along better. Perhaps where they could play D&D together, or play some video games or something. Oh well. We will never know. But why make these parallels at all? What purpose does it serve us to let us know what the similarity between the two is? It comes back to that Shadow of the Colossus connection, that in a world of desperate survival, there aren't really any heroes and villains, just different points of view on how to survive. Traditional video game logic dictates that your protagonist is a hero and the character they're taking down is a villain. It's easy to argue that when your protagonist is a simple farmhand who has to step up when a dark force infects the land. It's not so easy to argue when both characters have suffered losses at the hands of another, and when those characters have lives that aren't drastically different once you get past the superficial differences. The game does plenty to deconstruct both characters as good or evil. Ellie gets plenty of moments where she does not come across as virtuous or nice. One of the earliest examples of this is when she and Dina reach a courthouse and discuss the old system of law.
I wonder what it was like to serve on a jury. Bet it was fun. Sit down, look at evidence, try to tell if somebody's lying.
Just give me 5 minutes and my knife. I'd tell you if they were lying or not.
Oh, wow, okay.
We also see Ellie's obsession with getting revenge causing some rifts between her and Dina. When Dina reveals her pregnancy, Ellie gets very dismissive and calls her a burden.
I think I'm pregnant.
What?
Don't worry, it's not yours.
How long have you known?
I was late a few weeks ago.
A few weeks? We could have still turned back.
I didn't know. I wasn't sure, okay? I didn't want to be a burden.
Well, you're a burden now, aren't you?
And finally, there's a point in the story where we see Tommy's handiwork taught to him by Joel, which is presented as grim.
He was using them against each other.
How?
Joel told me about this. You ask this guy a question, but you don't make him say it, you make him write it down. And then you ask this guy, and if the facts match, you're telling the truth. If not,
You fuck him up.
yeah.
But despite it being notably grim, Ellie herself then attempts to employ this tactic later, albeit a little more clumsily.
Where's Abby?
You're that girl from Jackson.
Tell me where she went. How do we know you won't kill us?
Give her what she wants and we're dead.
You guys can survive this. I just need her.
Bullshit.
You. Come here.
Fucking get over here!
Point to where she is on this map. And then you. It better fucking match up.
Ellie's systematic killing of the WLF crew is also gruesome and not really all that satisfying. There are instances where we sense she tries to argue self-defense, such as when she stabs Jordan and then later Whitney, the last PlayStation Vita owner on Earth, as both of them attempt to attack Ellie in those encounters. But Nora's death is less justified as she's cowering by a door and choking on spores. You could argue she could turn into a zombie soon, but the first game establishes the infection takes a couple of days, so Ellie could have just left her to suffer, instead choosing to beat her into oblivion. Although, to be fair, neither of these options is particularly nice. Her killing of Mel and Owen is equally unjustified, especially as Mel is pregnant, which Ellie realizes too late. Outside of this moment though, Ellie actually seems to enjoy the killing. In short, Ellie is not a good person. Similarly, even though Abby is set up as the villain largely through killing the first game's protagonist, there are moments when she's shown to not be villainous. She gets to play with dogs on 2 separate occasions, she's shown to have a relatable flaw in her fear of heights, and most of her story is a redemption arc where she tries to rescue 2 kids, Yara and Lev, from a religious cult, as the cult are outwardly hostile to Lev for coming out as trans. This is summed up at the point where Abby has alienated herself from the WF for protecting Lev, and they have this exchange.
Oh my god, she's gone. Come on. Those were your fucking people. You're my people.
However, despite her redemption arc, she's still in a worse place than when she started. She loses her standing in the WLF for betraying the cause, and the friends that she planned to go and head off to California with all end up dead. However, there were plenty of indications that the relationships were all in flux after her mission regardless.
Hey,
Why have you been avoiding me?
I wasn't avoiding you.
Come on, you've barely said anything to me since Jackson.
I don't know. I guess I was shook by Jackson, too.
You don't think Joel deserved what he got?
I think he deserved worse. I just wish I didn't take part in it.
What did you mean about me and Owen?
I haven't seen him in like 2 weeks. He keeps picking up open assignments. Has he talked to you? Did he say anything, or...?
No, we're still not. I mean, I seen him in the mess hall, but we walk around each other. I haven't always done the right thing.
You're a piece of shit, Abby.
You always have been. I'm done with you.
What happened to us?
Maybe we stopped looking for the light.
Maybe.
It's clear, though, that despite her best efforts, Abby has brought all this on herself. Ultimately, Abby is not a good person. The ultimate message of all of this is that those who choose to engage in extreme violence and push for vigilante revenge justice ultimately suffer great consequences. With Abby's friendships lost and forced to flee to another part of the country, Ellie also discovers this in her journey. Her obsession places a strain on her relationships in other ways too. We see this in how critical Jesse is of her on a couple of occasions.
Abby is where he'll be headed, so if we just
What if
fall,
he's in trouble?
he can take care of himself.
Jesus Christ.
The best way to help Tommy is to go after Abby. You do this, I'm not saving your ass again.
I really hope you make it.
But this is mainly seen with Dina, who wants to make an effort to move forward, but Ellie struggles to follow. This creates a rift in their relationship, which ultimately ends with Dina leaving her alone in a farmhouse at the end of the game. This is especially tragic after Ellie tearfully admits to Dina that this is not the outcome that she wants.
I don't want to lose you. Good. I love you.
Prove it.
Stay. I can't.
Tommy also catches part of this when he tries to encourage Ellie to go back after Abby in the game's final section. Aside from getting torn into by Dina, he also admits that it's put a strain on his own relationship with his wife.
Maria good?
Oh, she's fine. We're taking some time apart.
Sorry.
The final confrontation between Ellie and Abby also shows how neither character has fared well from their journeys. Neither of them is in a fit state to fight, with Ellie bleeding out from an injury and Abby emaciated and starving. Abby, much further along in her journey, realizes this and tries to back out of it all, but is forced to fight back. At the end, no one wins, because while Ellie bested Abby, she did lose 2 fingers in the process, and this simple fact made her realize how pointless it all was. You see, those fingers are actually important to her. As she's moments from killing Abby, she sees a vision of Joel playing guitar and stops. Many have suggested this is bad writing, because of course, but the reason she stops from that image is the realization that the connection she still has to Joel's memory is the guitar, and with her fingers lost in the fight, it doesn't matter if she kills Abby or not. She's lost the connection that she had to him. In other words, her quest to avenge his death has cut away her remaining connection to his memory. She gained nothing and lost everything. The guitar symbolizes this further, as the main song that connects them, Pearl Jam's Future Days, features the opening line,
If I ever were to lose you.
and after losing Joel, Ellie does lose herself, and most of everything she holds dear in the process of dealing with that grief. But the thing to remember here is that all of this is ultimately the consequence of Joel's actions. Ellie's revenge was a response to Abby's revenge mission, which was a response to Joel acting the way he did in the ending of the first game. But while she was getting revenge for her father, her decision was also based on the fact that Joel's actions prevented a possible cure. Everything in The Last of Us 2 ties back in with the first game's ending, so it's time to go back and look at that. I talked a lot about the ambiguous ending of the first game in episode 4 of Losing the Plot, and with the sequel all I was concerned about was how they were going to address this ending. As I said back then, my main concern in Ellie's final word isn't that she accepts his account wholesale. My concern is that she knows he's lying, and that his unwillingness to be honest with her is actually damaging to the relationship that's so important to her. But at the same time, it's equally likely that their relationship would be damaged if he told her the truth. For me, no matter the outcome, Joel has lost Ellie. He was going to lose her through death, or lose her trust or faith in him. And that's the tragedy of The Last of Us. In a game about companionship in dark times, the game was always going to end with that companionship damaged. With the sequel now here, we're inevitably going to see the outcomes of this decision. I have no idea how it will be handled, and it's likely we'll be back here in a few months or so to discuss this further once I've played through the game. And here we are a few months later, and I'm going to discuss how this was handled. And it turns out, Ellie accepted his explanation, as evidenced in the flashback where Joel takes her to a museum. It's filled with warmth and joy, much like the warmth we saw develop between them in the first game. But as I suspected, she doesn't fully accept his explanation. This flashback ends with Ellie seeing a firefly symbol, and it's clear that it bothers her. It comes up again later when on patrol the two are confronted with 2 residents of Jackson who snuck out, got bitten, and either died or turned. Ellie confronts Joel here on whether or not he lied to her, unprompted, which heavily suggests it's a question that gnaws at the back of her mind at all times.
After you took me out of the Firefly Hospital, you said there were dozens of people like me. I've never met another immune person before. Have you? Why did you pull me out of there while I was still unconscious?
Because I let them run their tests. And when I saw that they were useless, I got us out of there.
How do you know they were useless? Maybe if you just would have given them more time, they could have figured something out.
There was no cure.
And this leads her to return to the scene of the crime, to head off to Salt Lake City and break into the hospital to see for herself what happened to the Fireflies. And there, the truth is laid out. The truth that Joel has hidden from her for years. And when he shows up anxious about her whereabouts, she confronts him and he's forced to admit what's going on. My theory about how this could affect their relationship is true on 2 fronts. She's disgusted by his truth and betrayed by his lies.
Tell me what happened here. If you lie to me one more time, I'm gone.
Making a vaccine. Would have killed you. So I stopped them.
Oh my God. Don't you fucking touch me! I'll go back. But we're done.
When he later tries to defend her at a party, she shuns him, and it's clear that forgiveness is not going to come easy to her. And this is the perspective of the supposed good guys. From Ellie's perspective, it's clear that her father figure isn't noble or good. So imagine how Joel's decision looks from Abby's perspective. It's clear from her flashbacks that her relationship with her father is great. They're incredibly close and show genuine love towards each other. We see that his decision to risk killing Ellie was not based out of malice or evil, but in trying something, anything, to save humanity from this fungus. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Abby expresses that
If it was me, I'd want you to do the surgery.
And then when she next sees her father, he's lying dead in a pool of his own blood on a surgery floor, killed by a man who may have also doomed humanity in the process. Her grief is vast, and to her, he's the greatest villain in the world. She didn't see the journey that he and Ellie took in the first game. She doesn't know their relationship. He's just a man who rode in, killed her dad, and left. Just like to Ellie, Abby is some rando who rode in, killed her father figure, and left. In both women's stories, one clear fact emerges. Joel is not a good person. Now, don't mistake my assessment that no one is good as meaning that everyone is bad. The Last of Us, as a franchise, doesn't deal in absolutes like that. And for everyone who complains about Abby's fitness regime being unrealistic despite mountains of evidence of how it's possible, they might want to consider why they believe so hard that some characters are good, while others are bad. Real life doesn't work that way, and the first game made that clear, with its ending that sparked endless debates on whether Joel was right or wrong, that no one in the game is good or bad either. On some level, Joel is just a dad who loves his daughter. On another level, he's a brutal and vicious killer, quick to act in aggression and violence. One of these is good and one of these is bad, and they both exist in the same man. Just as the Ellie who loves terrible puns is the same girl who could smash someone's face in with a pipe, and how Abby is the same woman who could protect a trans boy from persecution while also torturing and murdering a man in cold blood. The world they live in is harsh and bleak, and people have to make terrible choices, and what's worse, Joel may have made it bleaker by removing the source of hope in a cure. Although I still believe the idea of only one immune person and now only one person capable of developing a vaccine is a little far-fetched, that's not the point right now. Joel's decisions made everything worse for everyone, but they also made everything worse for themselves in responding to those consequences. In the world of The Last of Us, no one really wins. There is only the weight of your decisions and the consequences of your actions. And thanks to Joel's actions, at least 2 people have lost everything. You're allowed to like Joel and sympathize with him, but you also need to balance this with recognizing the bad too. This is the point of the epilogue flashback. This is the last time that Joel and Ellie spoke, and it shows that Ellie is willing to forgive Joel, but finds it difficult to do so.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
Ellie being so torn in her forgiveness is how we, as players, are supposed to feel about every character. And if you made it to this ending still feeling like you didn't get the climactic moment where you brutally murder Abby, or feeling that Joel on some level didn't deserve what he had coming to him, then you fundamentally misunderstood what the game was trying to tell you. However, while I'm willing to defend the game from some of the more rabid criticisms I've seen online, the game does have many narrative flaws. This focus on the message makes Last of Us 2 feel messy, and not in the gruesome zombie smashing way that the game intends. It feels reductive to just say The Last of Us 2 has a violence is bad message, because it's a wider message that touches on loss, grief, and consequence, but it is ultimately a message that could be summarized as violence is bad, even if your reasons for it are sympathetic. And this is fine, but there is inherently a problem in a game with that message endlessly hammering it into you, while also pushing you, the player, into engaging with that violence. Admittedly, you don't always have to engage in violence, as there are plenty of sections you can stealth your way through without engaging with anyone. But unlike the first game, it feels like there are many more sections where you're forced into combat whether you like it or not. And when you do fight back in these sections, the game does everything it possibly can to berate you for being violent. The main way this is expressed is in giving every enemy a name that others will shout if they find a body or see a friend killed in front of them, and honestly I find this a really cheap way of gaining some sympathy and trying to make the player feel bad. The central narrative already does a lot of legwork in making us realise that even those who oppose us have friends and lives of their own, and nothing is ever good or evil. The 2 main factions of the game have actual characters to connect with to deliver this message, with Abby from the WLF and Lev and Yara from the Seraphites, and their stories are much more effective at connecting us with the bad guys than some random guy yelling Emma! But this message of brutal violence is snuck in elsewhere with a flashback where Joel and Ellie talk comics.
Hey, you remember those, Savage Starlight comic books that you're into?
Yeah?
Tommy and I found some when we were moving through that school the other day.
Did you like them?
Well, you know what? It's not really my cup of tea, but... Dr. Daniela Starr, I mean, she's pretty...
She's a savage.
Well, what she does to Captain Ryan in that death match... Whew.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely deserved it, but...
We also have this conversation between Ellie and Jesse.
You ever worried they're gonna come back to Jackson after us?
What do you mean?
I mean, we're going through a lot of their people. In their city.
Because of what they did.
Didn't Abby and her friends come to Jackson because of something Joel did?
This place isn't like Jackson. I mean, Joel and Tommy helped Abby when she got attacked. These people are trying to kill everyone around them.
And of course the long slog that is the game's length and pacing, which results in you feeling as exhausted as the dueling protagonists in its epilogue. This may be intentional, and Neil Druckmann has gone on record to say the game isn't meant to be fun, but man is it tiring. In fact, this is the other main issue with The Last of Us 2 storytelling. The first Last of Us had a clear story from both a plot and a character perspective. The game was a journey across a ruined America between two strangers who come to understand each other as the journey progresses. Joel softens as he discovers a second chance at having a daughter, while Ellie hardens as the realities of the world become ever more apparent. We connect with the characters as they connect with each other, and the story lands every beat as a result. The Last of Us 2 is less coherent as a singular narrative. As I've shown in this video, there are plenty of clever moments in the game that show a solid narrative goal. The problem comes in connecting those moments and in maintaining the sense of community the first game nailed so well. The reason why the community message works so well in the first game is because everything was tied to the character journey, and every character they met contrasted with the central leads. Because the sequel has two separate but interlinked narratives, there are moments where the story can feel meandering and unfocused. There are some great character moments when Ellie and Dina arrive in Seattle, but they could be easily cut from the game because the area where they happen exists entirely off to the side of the main path. Ellie's journey turning into Shadow the Colossus forces the story to shift gears a little too suddenly too, and some of her sections can feel a little too lengthy and dragged out, such as the journey through Hillcrest and her encounter with the Seraphites. For Abby, her journey is all over the place, hopping back and forth between locations and motivations constantly. While there's certainly narrative logic to her various journeys, they too can feel a little repetitive and drawn out. The sequence descending through a building goes on a little too long for my liking, as does the trip to the Seraphites' island. They're both initially effective, but they really do outstay their welcome. The final section of the game is the opposite, but it comes with its own problems. We hastily shift to California, where the story suddenly rushes through to the ending. In this section we meet a group named the Rattlers who kidnap Abby along with a bunch of other prisoners and are brought down when Ellie helps free their captives. But for a game that worked immensely hard to flesh out the two factions in Seattle, the Rattlers feel like an afterthought. We learn nothing about their motivations, and their downfall happens partially off camera where their bases settle out in the distance, visible only through a tree line. It seems weird that a game so determined to make us sympathise with villains and realise the subjective nature of good and evil would throw in some generic faceless bad guys at the end to undermine that message a little. And to return to the comparison I made with Shadow the Colossus at the start of the video, there is a feeling that Team Ico's game delivers its message much more successfully and in a more streamlined manner, to the point where that game was considered a masterpiece by pretty much everyone who played it, while The Last of Us 2 has been incredibly divisive. Although it is easy to see why. It's a story that does everything it can to unseat the player, from the abrupt nature of Joel's shocking death to the sudden shift to playing Abby, the villain of the piece. Naughty Dog have deliberately crafted something designed to challenge people. And of course, if we're hoping to call video games art, we do need to have games that can be so shocking and divisive. But what this loses for me is the heart. The first game, as I've detailed in my previous video, was ultimately about community. It's a harsh world, but finding connections and looking for a reason to keep going were the key themes. Joel and Ellie find each other and form a pseudo-parental bond, and the various other characters in the game were trying to find their own connections too. In the sequel, everyone is angry and looking to murder someone. The tonal shift presents the harshness of the world in all its ugly glory, and while it does this effectively, it loses that sense of community and love that the first game had carrying it along. We warmed to Joel and Ellie not because of the harshness of what they were doing, but because of the relationship they built with each other. I don't feel anything in the sequel evokes that same feeling. It's not entirely dour. Both Ellie and Abby have some fun and or tender moments that help illustrate the importance of their relationships.
He's got that videotape thing.
Huh. Dong of the Wolf. Smash Brandy's cooch.
Are these?
It's porn.
Interesting taste, Eugene.
No. Whispering Spanish in my ear?
Hey!
That's private.
Oh my god. This is your place? How many sex dens do you have in this QC?
¿Qué? Perdón, no hablo inglés.
Joel liked you a lot too, you know. I used to think I had a crush on you.
Really?
I mean, you're handsome and whatever, but I'm not into your type.
What, Asians?
Yeah, that's obviously what I meant.
What's going on between you and your friend Owen?
Oh my god, Lev, now?
It seemed really awkward.
Just go!
Hey, if you lived in the old world, what would you buy with all that money?
I don't know. Maybe a big farmhouse?
But you can get a farmhouse now.
Okay. What would you get?
A space shuttle.
Right. Your astronaut thing.
Hey, it's cooler than a farmhouse.
Farmhouse is way more practical.
Man, when we get back home, I'm gonna find a couch, watch a movie, and drink until I pass.
Oh yeah? Which drink?
Which movie?
Strong questions. Movie's the one with, ¿cómo se llama? The girl who rides the wolf.
Oh, I love that one.
And drink, my mezcal from the party last week.
Excuse me? You mean our mezcal?
Say. I'll save some for you.
Oh, I could definitely go for a drink right now. If I wasn't so pregnant. And on the run.
But as great as these moments are, that's all they are. Moments adrift in a sea of violence, revenge, and misery that has a longer runtime than its more focused, more sympathetic predecessor. Perhaps that's the point. My experience with The Last of Us 2 felt miserable, exhausting, and kind of pointless, just like the revenge missions of its protagonists. And while certainly I can see that being intentional and effective if so, it doesn't make the game feel any less disappointing in its narrative decisions when compared to how great its predecessor was. In focusing so hard on the harshness of the world and getting so fixated by violence and brutality, Naughty Dog lost themselves and some fans in the process. Whether this was a good decision or not is still very much up for debate. And while Ellie has to live with the consequences of her choices and never be able to play guitar again, so too does Neil Druckmann, as he can never just tweet about Fall Guys without people shrieking at him in response. Let the man share his Jelly Bean Man wins, for God's sake. In conclusion, The Last of Us 2 is not bad writing, despite how much the internet insists that it is. It's brutal, unpleasant, and doesn't feel satisfying. It's intentional, but sometimes this can be to its detriment. But for all its flaws, it's a modern AAA game that dared to take a swerve and test people in a way that AAA games rarely do. And while others have fallen in love with this sequel, and others despise it with the fury of 1,000 suns, my feelings towards it are a lot more complex. I can see myself considering my feelings about the game for a long time. Although, for me, it definitely lives in the shadow of the Colossus that was its predecessor. Yes, I went there.
Talking away, I don't know what I'm to say, I'll say it anyway. Today's another day to find you shying away. I'll be coming for you, love, okay? Take on me. Take me on.